Hey everyone, Kayla Curtin here, recording my research project here in the town of Geneseo, New York. And while I was raised in a town 30 minutes south called Wayland, New York, I currently reside here in Geneseo. Geneseo is located in Livingston County, which was established on February 23, 1821, which does happen to be after the Treaty of Big Tree. Geneseo was one of the original founding towns of Livingston County and is also the county seat. Geneseo sits on what was formerly Seneca land and is named after the tribe that resided here, Geneseo. And this was prior to white settlement. The point of settling Geneseo was to increase European influence in western New York. Geneseo itself was formed in the 1790s with help of the Wadsworth brothers, who were introduced to the town during the Treaty of Big Tree. I will get more into them later, but they ceded tens and thousands of acres from the Seneca after the Treaty of Big Tree. This is the Big Tree Inn. This is just one of the landmarks in Geneseo that is named after the Treaty of Big Tree, signed in 1797. The Holland Land Company and Robert Morris wanted to open up western New York, and that meant taking land away from the Senecas, whether or not they consented. Essentially, what the Treaty of Big Tree did was take away land that the Seneca Nation was already reluctant to sell, given the fact that other settlers had not given them the land or the money that they had promised for the land they had already sold. Robert Morris was unable to make the trip to Geneseo, so he sent his son Thomas Morris with strict instructions on how he was to conduct the treaty, especially knowing once again that the Seneca chiefs were not going to give this land over easily. Thomas Morris was instructed that he was to get it at all costs and not to be too generous. So what he did was he took away the alcohol from the Seneca Nation and bribed them that after they sold the land, they would be given the alcohol back. Red Jacket, one of the prominent Seneca leaders, knew this was coming and pleaded to Robert Morris and Thomas Morris not to take away their land. During the Treaty of Big Tree, this is when the Wadsworth brothers are first introduced to the town of Geneseo. Also during the negotiations of the Treaty of Big Tree, a group of Seneca men, knowing that they were becoming cheated out of their land, were very reluctant to sell and became violent. This is part of the reason why in the centennial celebration, the Livingston County Historical Society refers to the Seneca as warlike. Thomas Morris knew that the men were not going to be the ones who would sell the land to him, so he went over their heads and went to the women of the Seneca Nation. He told the women of the Seneca Nation that their men were neglecting them and their children of a life of ease, comfort, and luxury. He also gave them lavish gifts. This made the women sell the land. On September 15, 1797, the Treaty of Big Tree is signed, and the Holland Land Company and the Morris family are given 4 million acres of land, and the Seneca Nation was given $100,000 in compensation, along with just 200,000 acres to compensate for the fact that they had nowhere to go and were being given reservations. What the Seneca Nation did not know is that the money that was given to them, they would never actually receive. It was put in the stock of the National Bank of the United States. And as we know, the Bank of the United States ended in 1833. And according to Seneca record, they never received any of that money. The Morris family has the next town over, named Mount Morris, named after them. And while the town of Mount Morris is very proud of being the birthplace of Francis Bellamy, the man who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, and being home to portions of Letchworth State Park, you can see that there is no recognition of their namesake, the Morris family. But what is recognized is in the centennial celebration in 1897, the Morris family is praised for everything they did in the Treaty of Big Tree, including the fact that they withheld alcohol from the Seneca Nation, the fact that they called them warlike people, and that they never bothered to explain to the Seneca what $100,000 was actually worth. The Seneca Nation is where Geneseo was founded. Today, there are 7,800 members of the Seneca Nation spread out amongst 5 reservations that are owned by the Seneca Nation and not by the U.S. government, which is what most reservations are owned by. The Seneca Nation has 8 clans, some of which are the deer, hawk, bear, turtle. On the Seneca Nation website, they don't mention the Treaty of Big Tree. And why that is, I'm not sure why they omitted it, but they do mention other treaties that severely affected them, like the Treaty of Fort Stanwix and the Canandaigua Treaty of Peace, which was signed 3 years before the Treaty of Big Tree. But they omitted it from the list. Does that have to do with the fact that they still don't want to acknowledge it, or that they just did not see it as important? For the purpose of being able to hear what I have to say, we're filming this from inside the car. But directly behind me is the Wadsworth homestead, which was home to William Wadsworth. The Wadsworth brothers, who were originally from Connecticut, came to Geneseo during the Treaty of Big Tree in 1797. They purchased, after the treaty, thousands of acres from the Holland Land Company, who had taken the land from the Seneca, because the Seneca were essentially coerced into signing the treaty. James Wadsworth, who was also present at the treaty, his house is now the county courthouse and jail, which is directly on the other end of the road. At one point in time, the 2 brothers probably could have seen one another from each other's house. Both brothers became an important part of the history of Geneseo, as they have many namesakes left here in Geneseo, like the Wadsworth Free Library. That's it. Another namesake of the Wadsworths is the fact that William Wadsworth, named after the original William Wadsworth, still lives in the Wadsworth homestead and is currently Geneseo's town supervisor. This is SUNY Geneseo. When people hear the name Geneseo, they generally think of the prized liberal arts institution. What they don't think of is how James Wadsworth, one of the Wadsworth brothers, created the school in 1867, naming it the Wadsworth Normal School at Geneseo. The school would change names 9 times before it became a member of the SUNY institution, and first-year students had the opportunity to stay in Seneca Hall or Onondaga Hall, 2 of the Iroquois nations. What most first-year students don't know is that the land sits upon Seneca land that was stolen in the Treaty of Big Tree. Most lifelong residents of Geneseo are completely unaware of the history of Geneseo or the Treaty of Big Tree, but they have no problems living on Big Tree Road, eating at the Big Tree Inn, staying at the Big Tree Lodge, or even looking at the Big Tree in the Genesee Valley Museum. But I would like to think that anyone who knows any history of the Iroquois can probably come to an assumption of how the town was formed and who was here before white settlers were. But I'd like to think if they heard the story from a native point of view, there would be significant change, and this dark history would be publicized and acknowledged for the fact that the Seneca Nation deserves recognition.